Hi, welcome to this time together with Corazon Latino Moms Clean Air Force and a panel that we have today. My name is Betsy Lopez-Wagner. I'm a Chief Strategist at López-Wagner Strategies. Alongside my team, we work on environmental and social justice work with mission-driven individuals, organizations, and companies to develop equitable and execute inclusive strategies, really to engage others around communications and really strengthen leadership for collective impact to advance social good. So one of the core issues of our day today is climate change. It also happens to be a global pandemic that we're experiencing. So today, this time with you, we really want to be able to share a bit more about what does this mean? What does this mean to our immigrant communities? What does this mean to our communities of color? And what does this mean to the Latino and Latinx community at large? So climate science tells us that millions of people will be displaced because of climate change. This will all happen over the course of the next 50 years, if not sooner. So when we talk about displacement of people, those are climate refugees. You're going to hear from one of those people today, Niria Alicia, who's going to be able to share a bit about her recent experience after a September 8th fire changed her life forever. So Niria, who you will soon see and hear from, is a climate activist. She is the daughter of immigrants. She's the daughter of a farm worker, and she herself has done an incredible world of good in and around advocating for climate and advocating for environmental justice. You'll also hear from James. James Puerini is an Oregonian. He's a forester, a son of immigrants, a former wildland firefighter, a forest worker and rights advocate. And he also happens to be the co-founder of a tremendous initiative called the Yale Wildlife Firefighter Rights Initiative, which he formed alongside a colleague this year. Our last panelist that you're going to hear from today is Cinthia Moore. So Cinthia is an advocate for Moms Clean Air Force and for Ecomadres. So not only is she a community leader and an organizer in Nevada, but she's also a mother, like me. She's the granddaughter of farm workers, and she has a personal connection to the fires that she wants to be able to talk about. So some of the things that we don't often hear every day in media reports or our social media channels are about the systemic health inequities that are affecting our communities, about the environmental injustice and the environmental racism that has brought us to this brink, to this point, this breaking point. So I'm going to go ahead now and pass the mic over to Niria. Niria is going to share with us a bit about her experience with these fires and bring us forward into our conversation that we'll be having today. Niria?
Thank you, Betsy. I want to start off by saying a prayer of gratitude for the fact that we're all here today, alive and well. I know last week about this time, I wasn't so sure where my life would be. So I'm wanting to just ground in the gift that is life, even in these treacherous and turbulent times. Give thanks to Corazon Latino, Betsy, Cinthia, and James for taking time out of your day. And like you said, Betsy, I've had the honor of being in service to advocacy for climate justice for our communities. And I didn't think that I would become a climate refugee overnight. But unfortunately, and fortunately, that was my reality on September 8th. And I say fortunately because I was very happy that I was here in my hometown to be able to evacuate my mother and my father from the fires, because a lot of the news that we were receiving was not breaking. We just heard in the local news that the emergency services that was supposed to be putting out alerts just didn't fail to do their job. And our Spanish-speaking communities who don't have smartphones, who don't have radios, who don't have TVs, were their lives were even more in danger. And I know because had my mom not had her phone, she's one of the people that doesn't have a smartphone. She has this flip phone that she carries around once in a while. Thank God she took her phone with her that morning, because I was able to call her, and she was scared. She didn't know what was going on. And I told her, I said, just come home now, Mom. We have to go. And we were able to leave and make it out safe. But sadly, more than 2,350 families lost their home that night. My father being one of them, who lost everything. I was also able to call him. He didn't know what was going on. He just saw smoke, but he used to be a wildland firefighter and was just so trusting that that it would be handled. And yeah, I don't think that, I mean, I think my dad, when he was a firefighter and a forestry worker 20, 30 years ago, the weather conditions were a lot more different. So the fires that he fought and the lands that he managed are not the same fires and are not the same challenges that we are seeing. And we know that that is a direct result of climate change.
Yeah, thank you so much, Niria. I think that's a reflection that's really important for all of us to take account. So often when we do hear about climate refugees, they feel like they're in the distant future. We feel for them, we hurt for them. But I think this happened to you. This happened to someone now that we know. When you mentioned, about, in particular, wildland firefighters, I think this is an area where it's incredibly important to be able to hear from someone who's been in that position, who can tell us also, what does it feel like to be in those scenarios where you are giving all that you have in service to your community. James, can you share with us a bit about your work and your reflection, and also now what you're doing, in terms of being an advocate for worker rights?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And the very first thing that I want to say is to you, Niria. Thank you for sharing that. I want to express my gratitude to you for that. I know that this issue is very real and present. I'm also from a community that's facing threat from wildland fire, and have dedicated a lot of my career and sort of upbringing to fire suppression, active fire management, and things like that. So I wanted to say thank you to you for expressing that, and thank you, Cinthia, for being here, Betsy, for having me, Corazon Latino, as well. This is really an honor. My sort of background in fire is I grew up in a sort of small rural community in Oregon. I got into wildland fire to help pay for my tuition in college when I turned 18. You don't get into wildland fire to become a hero or nothing like that. You get into wildland fire to pay the bills. And I think that that's something that is an important piece of this conversation too, is from a worker rights standpoint. So I fought fire for 5 years. I sort of moved on to work more in the policy world, where I was working on wildland fire rights and labor rights. And after that, sort of got to work with some fire adapted communities groups that were helping to sort of look at fire adaptation, emergency response, and things like that. The way that I think about fire and the way that I've sort of been grounded in it is in my upbringing. I'm the product of immigrant people. My mom is from Baghdad, Iraq. A lot of my upbringing is rooted in being part of the diaspora of Middle Eastern people who have been impacted by the war in Iraq and refugeeism. So what I sort of think of when I think of wildland fire and think of environmental emergencies and climate disasters are these linkages, these things that you can really put together, right? From war refugees and violence systemically to this sort of new world of climate violence that we're being sort of brought up into. I see those linkages. It's something that I'm deeply passionate about. Niria, I'm so glad that you're here with us to discuss that, and Cinthia to talk about it in the context that you're here to talk about it, because this is very real, it's very present, and we all know that the science is telling us that this is going to be exacerbated over time. So thank you for having me. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, and I think as you start to talk about those linkages, I think this is a really excellent opportunity for us to share with the audience who's gathered with us today that what you're seeing is in this extreme weather is climate change. It's climate change that is unfolding before our eyes. Not only is it going from those wildfires, but now they're becoming urban fires. This isn't just land that can regenerate. This is communities that are being decimated. And, you know, particularly the communities that you, James, and you, Niria, have come from are communities that are predominantly Indigenous and or Latino communities. So I think that's an important part to note. I think also, you know, something else that we have really been hearing a lot more about, which is incredibly useful for our audience today, is about carbon emissions. Is just, you know, a lot of it can be really wonky, right? We're starting to talk about more about particulate matter. We're talking more about what's in the air. What are the things that we don't see? What are those toxins, those pollutants that, you know, we don't even recognize are within close proximity because they've been there for so long? So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring Cinthia on. Cinthia is going to be able to share with us a bit about her connection to the wildfires where she's at in Nevada, as well as the health education that she leads for communities there.
Thank you so much, Betsy, for that. And thanks, James and Niria, for sharing your stories. I think it's important for people to know the stories and hear directly from people that have been impacted by the wildfires, especially those of us that are not in Colorado, in Oregon, California, or Washington, where the major fires are currently going. However, I may be hundreds of miles away in Las Vegas, and you may not think that we're being impacted, but we are. Every day I get an advisory email from the county alerting us to be aware of the smoke and to stay indoors as much as possible. If we don't have to go out, they're telling us stay home. Don't open your windows. And I notice, I don't really go out, but when I do, what I have noticed is that my eyes have become watery. I have an itchy throat. With my son, because of his allergy issues and his eczema, I don't take him outside to play, and he's only 3 and he wants to spend a lot of time outdoors. But we are being impacted here. I know a few days ago we had our ground ozone level was really high, and I had a migraine that day. I looked outside and it was extremely cloudy. You would think it was going to rain, but it was because of the smoke. A lot of my family members were having issues that day as well. Some of my friends were saying, you know, I have a headache. I don't understand what's going on. But we see those here, and already Las Vegas is one of the worst cities when it comes to air quality. We're in the top 10 for worst air quality in the entire country. So a lot of the work that I've been doing with Moms Clean Air Force and Ecomadres is informing them and letting people know that the air that we breathe has a direct effect on our health, and especially our children. A lot of times I talk to parents and I share my personal story about my son, how he has eczema flare-ups or allergy issues when we have bad air quality days. And they've said, oh my gosh, I've noticed that with my son or my daughter as well. I've noticed that they have a rash. I noticed that they start sneezing a lot, and then that's when they start connecting the dots. So we're experiencing things, and it's just creating awareness of what those things mean to us and how it affects our health. I really can't imagine being in the middle of it, where, you know, you, Niria and James, where you guys are. And thank you again for being here to share your stories with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for that reflection. I do think it's really important that we think about the health of our kids when we're talking about this. You know, again, that is a key aspect of what is happening. Is they are that generation that is going to be living with climate change, and they're going to be, you know, living in conditions that are much more exasperated than what we've been able to encounter to date, which is, you know, significant. Excuse me. One of the things that I want to flag or actually I'll start that part over. Something that I think is really important that we talk about is that, while we have representatives here from the West, these are fires there are wildfires that are happening in other parts of the globe. There are also climate effects. There are actions and activities, human-caused climate change. I think that's a really important part to talk about. Now, I know, Niria, you have advocated at global levels, most recently at COP25, to be able to really bring about a change. You're looking to be able to directly influence and let people know what is happening. I think you've predominantly worked with communities in California around that. From this recent experience that you've had, what are you thinking is next? It sounds like you've really found yourself in a place where not only are you helping to directly organize communities, but you're bringing relief.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen how in other disasters around the country and around the world, our low-income communities are always the ones that are hit the hardest, and we are always the ones that have the hardest time recovering. And if there's anything that I've learned from being right here at home, and seeing this disaster sweep across my home community, like I mentioned, FEMA, well, I might not have mentioned, but last week FEMA was saying that only 600 homes were destroyed. Well, I, who am from here, know that that was not an accurate number. As of yesterday at 3 p.m., FEMA still has not been here. So as we know, these resources that come from the federal level are too slow for the need that we have here. And my biggest reminder is that when disaster strikes, it is our community, it is peer-to-peer, it is us right here, right now, supporting one another that is going to help bring relief the quickest. And we've already seen that happen, the way that so many of my community members and myself have just become humanitarian disaster relief organizers overnight, and have coordinated amongst ourselves. As Latinos, we have a resilient culture that is oriented to collective community care, making sure that it is the person with the least, it is the person that has the highest need, that donations and that support goes to them. And if I've learned anything from my international climate justice community, like you said, I have close relationships with so many relatives around the world. If I've learned anything from them, it is that it's going to be us. It is going to be us helping each other that's going to create and bring forth the solutions that we need. And yesterday I was, despite the heartbreak and grief, incredibly filled with hope in seeing that our ancestors and our culture has that embedded in it already. We know how to move as community. We know how to take care of our children and our elders. We know how to orient ourselves when disaster happens, because we have been dealing with this for more than 500 years. So I have a heavy heart, but I also have a heart full of hope that our community is going to continue to show up for one another, and that we will hopefully recover from this and come out stronger on the other end.
Yeah, I think that's something important to reflect on, coming together for community. You're doing that right now from your hotel room. Also during a global pandemic, you're making sure mask on, heart out, you're helping directly with relief efforts. Very similarly, James, you shared with me that you're doing some work to make sure that folks on the ground, those who are in those firefighter positions, actually have the equipment they need. And some of the things are things that perhaps people in this audience could help to support. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to. And something for me right now is that I am from sort of the Mid-Willamette Valley in Oregon. I'm not in Oregon right now, which is unfortunate. I'm in school. So what I've been trying to do is work with sort of my community and Yale Wildland Firefighter Rights Initiative, some of the sort of resources that we have on the ground. My brother's a firefighter. He was on an engine crew in Medford for 2 weeks. He then got brought up to the Echo Mountain fire, which was on the coast in Lincoln City. He's been dispatched all over the place. His partner is in the incident command team that was on Echo Mountain 2. That fire has been mostly contained at this point, which is great news. One of my brothers is doing that. My other brother is an ICU nurse in Portland, who's sort of on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. And what he's been doing is on his days off, when he's supposed to be taking his rest, he's been collecting money using GoFundMe pages, running it down to the fire camps to make sure that people have the things that they need. One of the most incredible things that I heard from him is that even on the fires that he was going down to, he would go down to the fire camp, he would talk to the human resources people, he would ask them, what do the firefighters need? There are some common things that firefighters need. They need boot grease, they need shoelaces, they need Red Bulls to stay awake, they're working 16-hour days, things like that. One thing that they said is that the agency crews, those are the federal government crews. The federal government crews are pretty well equipped. The contract crews, which include a lot of Latinx people in those crews, these are people that work seasonally on fires. They needed socks and t-shirts. And to me, that signals that there's an equipment disparity and there's an inequity in the way that those resources are distributed. So what we do is we try and channel those voices as part of our group. We try and make sure that we are directing the voices of people in Wildland Fire who can't necessarily use their voice themselves. That comes in various different forms. We've been covering COVID-19, we've been covering incarcerated labor, we've been covering a range of different issues on that. That's something that I'm seeing in the last day, and that was my brother who walked right up to a human resources person and asked him about it. So that's just one example.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to that because I'm not sure if I mentioned, but a lot of our community members here, a lot of our gente that lost their homes are out working, putting these fires out.
Mm-hmm.
And even someone just sent me the FEMA application. Our community members, our raza that are gente con visa, people that come with visas, folks who are mixed legal status, folks who are undocumented will not qualify for this federal relief funds. And how we've seen how the government has, instead of helping our hardworking people, chooses to deport our relatives back to their home country and to separate families, to continue putting more trauma on top of trauma. So it's going to be really important for us on the ground to make sure that we are looking out for those relatives that are scared to go to these official evacuation areas, because there's police that are walking around making sure people are safe. But we know that police don't make me feel safe when I see them. And I know that, and I'm a citizen, so I have an immense amount of privilege that even my fear is not as big as other people in my community.
Yeah, and Niria, you had spoken, I know you had spoken to me earlier this week just about some of the work that you're doing there on the ground, some of the phone banking that you're doing. Can you share a bit about what does that look like? Like, I know you said that some of the people who lost their own homes are some of the people who are now front and center also alongside you, trying to advocate, not only advocate for resources, but they're the people who are taking up, kitchens and hotels to be able to, make food, provide food. So very resilient essence of our community. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yes. Like I said, I've never felt more proud to be, and today is Mexico's Independence Day. I've never felt more proud to come from such a strong bloodline and such a culture that is just so badass, like we have a culture that is, resilience is deeply ingrained in our culture, because even in the desert, when we would do relief work for some of the migrants who were crossing, the moment a new group would walk in, the patients that we were taking care of and nursing back to health would immediately shift their orientation to supporting the new group that came in. And it is just incredible, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to support one another. The government, mayors, governors, FEMA, nobody knows everybody who lived in those neighborhoods. I've been phone banking these neighborhoods and asking, hey, do you know if your neighbor in mobile home number 36 made it out? And they're like, yeah, I know that the ones in 15, 14, 27, and 72, we all made it out. We're alive. Like, we have incredible networks already that are just rooted in our relationships and how we are such community oriented people. Even when we do migrate from other parts of, Mexico. I know my mom came to Oregon because she had a great aunt here, and people, we orient around our kin, and that is also like what allows us to be so resilient in these times. So many of when I was evacuated, I stayed at my cousin's house with her husband and her two children, and so did my mom. And she called us and was like, come and stay here. Don't spend money on hotels. We got you. We'll be tight here, but just come. So those are certain networks of resilience that are so overlooked. And I just want to highlight, because I'm seeing so many of these pictures of our people crying and in their worst time. I myself have had my crybaby moments where I just crybaby myself for a little while, and then I wash my face and I get right back to work, because we also need to give time for our grief. So I want to just paint the picture of the unbelievable superhuman strength that did sprout overnight after the Almeda fires left almost 2,500 of us houseless.
Yeah. And I want to note, for those who are tuning in, that isn't the only fire that is happening in Oregon. So, James, can you share a bit about what you know about some of the fires that not only you have worked on, but those that, your family, again, is supporting out there, is really trying to, help to support their communities by protecting those lands and those homes?
Yeah, so there's the fires in Southwest Oregon, which by all accounts have been the most devastating so far, especially to the communities of Talent and Phoenix, of course, which are just absolutely in my thoughts and prayers. And let's stop talking about thoughts and prayers too. Let's start talking about the way that emergency resources and management are distributed, and about pre-commercial thinning and active management on these lands to ensure that the most vulnerable communities are not at the highest risk of wildland fire. That's a story that plays out again and again and again. We're seeing that in Phoenix and Talent right now, I think. That's in addition to climate change, right? That's just things that can be done right now that don't have anything to do with climate change. So we can start there. The fire, there's a fire that's coming down from the Cascades through an area called Estacada and Malala. That's one of the biggest fires that the state of Oregon has ever seen. It's encroaching on southeast Portland. So that is a very interesting fire, because fire has not gotten this close to Portland in a very long time. These are areas that don't have what's called high burn probability, so they're not very likely to burn those areas. But there's a lot of heavy timber in those areas, so they need to be treated as well, because when they do burn, they have the potential to get very hot. So there's some fires on the coast too. So the fires on the coast, Echo Mountain was a fire on the coast in Lincoln City that was moving up the highway that devastated a community called Otis. It was moving toward the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and their agency. That is native land, that is indigenous land. They generate timber on that land. That timber goes back into the community. So what they do is they do forestry where they're generating revenue that cycles back through the community. So all across our state, you're seeing these different stories of communities that have sort of life pathways and values that are being threatened. And it's not always the $2 to $3 million house on the hillside, right? A lot of the times, those are the stories that we see, the houses that are burning down, that are big, giant, and sort of these incredibly big houses, right? There are working class people that are being affected by this right now, and they don't always get the story, right? So that's something that I wanted to acknowledge too. So you're seeing this really across the state. You're seeing this in areas that aren't likely to burn right now. which is a combination of a lot of things. You have these sort of freak weather conditions that are climate change embedded, and then you also have a history of undermanagement of these lands. We need to get forest workers working in the woods. We need to do it at scale, and we need to pay them. We need to pay those people. We need to give them benefits. They need to be taken care of, because not having a living wage and not having a sustainable way to do this very, very difficult work just doesn't work. So we need massive investments in forest work and forest workers.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's something you noted. I want to dig in a little bit deeper. So we know that like climate science is also telling us that we also need to protect not only our oceans, but also protect our forests. Now, what can you tell us about, some of that smart land management? Because, I think we maybe all have read something or another in recent months where timber industry just wants us to go and do a bunch of logging, but that's not actually what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about how to pay homage to the land and also to be able to protect it, to ensure that these fires don't get to this level. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I like to think that the history of fire suppression started with sort of colonial expansion west. So we can start to think of the way that this land has changed since settler colonialism started to come into this land. So I think what we're seeing now, the way that I like to think about it, at least in terms of fire, is you think about a fire pit, right? Like if you're having a fire in your backyard, that fire, if you throw a ton of logs on and you stack them up, you really, really stack them up, you're going to have a big, hot fire that burns really, really, really tall, right? If you have smaller sticks, you spread them out a little bit, it's going to be cool. It's going to be a lot less intense, right? Those intense fires can actually be very beneficial to ecosystems. But those intense fires become unmanageable fires when it's very dense fuel. So when those trees are close together, when they're unhealthy, the forest is screaming at us right now. It is not happy. It is unhealthy. It is too dense. It needs to be worked. It needs to be managed. And we need to tackle climate change at the same time.
Yeah. So something I think this, reminds me of is really if we went back to, 2018. So thinking about the fire season in California. At the time I was living in California, I know that fall was so atrocious. I actually had to send, my family to the Midwest. It was like, probably should not be present here. You hadn't seen the sky, the sun in who knows how long. And, walking around with N95 masks at the time was not the norm in other parts of the country like it is during this pandemic. Now, you had shared with me some images that I know we're going to be sharing with our audience shortly. Just being able to showcase like the work that you've done previously also in California, during some of the deadliest and most destructive wildfire seasons that have been exacerbated because of climate change. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those images look like that, you have seen or you've experienced?
So what you get in fires and Niria, I'm guessing that this is very different than what your dad's experience was fighting fire, right? What we're seeing is these sort of enormous plumes, right? You're seeing fires that rage up into the tops of the canopies of wonderful forests, and those are overly dense, undermanaged forests. Forests that don't get what's called good fire, right? When we have that low severity, nice, cool, clean burn, that is good fire. That fire rejuvenates the land. It adds nutrients to the soil. It clears out some of that underbrush that makes it so the fire doesn't get up into the tops of the canopies. It's good. So when we get less of that type of fire, we get these huge fires where what you're seeing, you just see it in front of you, and it's clearly catastrophic. It's raging up into the tops of the canopies. It's raining destruction down on these communities. It's shooting embers for miles and miles and creating what are called spot fires that are little tiny fires that then build together. So what we're getting is an issue that's exacerbated by so many different factors. It's really a wicked problem, right? It's under management. It's under appreciation of the people who are supposed to be doing that work or who have traditionally historically done that work. It's an underappreciation of those people. It's an underinvestment in those people. It's and climate change too.
Yeah. So I think we're at the point in our conversation, and I'd love for this to move into much more of a fluid conversation amongst the three of you. What can people do? So people have heard some real horrors that you're all experiencing because of these wildfires. What can people do? How can they spring into action? What are those things that are most immediate, and then those things that perhaps they can do in their day-to-day lives that can be able to help?
I'll go ahead and take that one. We can't wait for the government. We can't wait for someone to come save us. It is us saving each other. That's the way I have seen this work, and that's the way we have seen this work around the world. It is us rooting in relationship with our families, with our neighbors, with each other. Like I said, this emergency alert didn't get sent out at all. At all. Like I said, when I was driving out, my friend, I kept asking her, Lila, please, can you look up what is going on? I'm driving away from the smoke, but I have no idea. There's nothing on the news. And the both of us were just appalled that we were seeing that this was a clear emergency and there was no information being sent out. So what do you know? What would be the best way to solve that at the community level? If you know something's going on, go bang on doors, call each other, call your relatives. I was calling my relatives in Talent, in Phoenix. I called my dad in Phoenix. I called my relatives in Central Point, in Medford. And it's just us looking out for one another, because the governors aren't going to know who is who and who's related to who. That is the best way we can help. Also, I know that after 9/11, the president at the time was like, everything's fine. Just keep shopping. No, we can't just keep throwing money at every crisis. We really have to take up responsibility that this is only the beginning of so many more climate disasters that are going to be coming our way. And the way we recover from this is going to be so important as to how we survive and come out of this in the future when the next wildfire comes. And yes, I love your point, James, about good fires and bad fires, because we know that indigenous peoples had land management practices with the good kinds of fires. We know, like in my family, we still use slash and burn out in Mexico. And it's these land management practices that were forgotten in the 70s here that created all of that fuel that caused these these really intense fires. Because like you said, these aren't regular fires. These are fire storms.
I wanted to remind everyone that we're just 5 weeks away from one of the more consequential elections of our lifetime. And everything's on the line right now. Our children's health, the stability of the planet that they will inherit, and climate change action. We need someone that's going to act on climate change and do something. We cannot continue to let political apathy get in the way. Every single vote matters. And I can speak from experience here in Nevada. We have a state senator that was elected by 4 votes. He won his election by only 4 votes. And we recently had a special session that would determine more funding for social services and education. And he was the one person that could have voted yes, but instead he voted on party lines and decided to vote no. And it's because elections have consequences. And when people say, well, my vote doesn't matter, it does. Because that one person that could have made a huge difference in Nevada only won by 4 votes and decided to vote along party lines. And so listening to the different Nevadans that called in at 2 a.m. expressing their support for this bill. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about how the campaigns are not reaching out to the Latino community. I see that where I live. They're not putting the effort, but it's also up to us to talk to our friends, family, and neighbors and remind them that they have a vote, and that they have a voice. I have cousins that are DACA recipients and they're not able to vote. And every time I vote, I dedicate my vote to them because I feel that I cannot take this privilege that's voting for granted. And I send them a selfie. I'm like, hey, I voted, and this one's dedicated for all of you. So it's just reminding people, hey, we didn't always have the right to vote. For example, I'm a naturalized citizen. I naturalized in 2008, so that was the first time that I was able to vote, and I have voted in every election since then, and I have dedicated a lot of my career in making sure that our community stays informed. And I also wanted to remind people we have options in this election. We can vote by mail, we can vote in person, we can early vote. Please just make a plan and don't forget to vote. It's really important.
Yeah, I think it's really key. You like hit that spot on right now, like never before. We need to mobilize. We need to organize alongside, not only with the Latino community, but communities of color, because we're just essentially weeks away from a major election. Climate and social justice consciousness is high like never before. We need to really lean into that as well. And as you noted, if you have the legal right to vote, exercise your vote. It is so important. I think the other thing that's really important that we note before we move to James to be able to close us out is the census. We're talking right now about land management. We're talking about people. We're talking about access to resources for communities. And first and foremost, if you have not taken the census, any person of any legal status can take that census, and that census is going to determine the resources, not only that you're seeing within your communities, your schools, but beyond. So really hone in on that. If you have the ability, you can take the census over the phone. Census workers are also, there's ways that you can engage with those census workers. Go to uscensus.gov. You can do this by mail. So I think those are things that we're going to follow up with, I think throughout the course. As we close out, we'll go ahead and we'll share some of those resources. So look to the Corazon Latino and Moms Clean Air Force pages for more information on how can you vote? Again, vote. If you have the ability to vote, please do so. James, can you go ahead and close us out? Tell us, what is that other action that we should be thinking about? What are things that folks at home can be doing right here, right now, related to this conversation, this critical moment that we're in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you all. I really appreciate that. To Cynthia's point, vote like your life depends on it because your life depends on it. Betsy, to your point, please fill out that census. Let me tell you, as someone who is working in the science community right now, the best resource that we have for looking at communities that might be disproportionately impacted by these natural disasters is information that we can glean from the census. Please fill out that census. That's very important. The next that I wanted to just mention is please call emergency managers and tell them that you need and demand multilingual and culturally responsive opportunities and resources that come to you in an event when these types of things happen. That happens at the local level a lot. We need to talk to FEMA, but we also need to be talking to our local level officials to make sure that they're making investments in multilingual and multicultural resource management and disaster preparedness. The last thing that I want to say is support active management. I think that we need to sort of get above the partisan fray of what it means to have a healthy forest. That means climate change. That also means actively managing our forests. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is support the divestment of land back to indigenous communities in this country. I think that the indigenous people of this country know how to manage land, they know how to manage fire, and they know how to manage natural resources. We have to be continuing to support the divestment of land back to indigenous communities.
As we go ahead and we wrap up today, are there any final thoughts anyone would like to share?
Yes. We need to divest immediately from all fossil fuels and stop all new fossil fuel projects immediately. Governors of all states, enough is enough. We need to support indigenous-led restoration projects and land management practices that kept these territories thriving for thousands of years. We need to restore our traditional food systems here in the Pacific Northwest. That was deeply embedded with salmon. And for those of us who migrated here with indigenous roots somewhere else, we need clean rivers to grow our corn and our beans and our squash. And we need to take care of our children and make sure that they feel like in the midst of all of this and all the climate anxiety that our younger generations are facing, including myself. I'm 28, so I'm not a youth anymore. I'm like a grown woman now. But that was a recent identity shift. Yeah, it's important that our young people know that we have agency and we have power, especially our kids. When we started this GoFundMe, my little 4-year-old nephew gave me a quarter and said, "Here, you can spend it on whatever you need." It's important that we treat our children as active agents of change because they absolutely are, and they are the elders of tomorrow who we need to mentor and support for, what they're going to face when they're 80 years old, when they're 70 years old. So that's all I want to say for today. Thank you all so much.
No, I think on that note, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up. Huge amount of gratitude to those of you who are still with us, who have tuned in throughout the course of this conversation. A very deep and loving thank you to James, Cinthia, Niria. And, just to close us out, again, those big things that you want to keep in mind. Vote if you have the legal right to do so. Take the census. You can do that regardless of status. Make sure that you're calling elected officials. You're holding those people accountable. Demand access to information, in the language, in multiple languages, to ensure, that those within your community are able to reach that. And again, a very big thank you to Corazon Latino and Moms Clean Air Force for allowing us to use their platforms to be able to share this content and information with you. So on that note, thank you so much and have a great evening.